Our next presentation will be by John Gabriel from Agora Institute of Knowledge and Management, talking on the issue of human resource management practice in Southeast Asia, a comparative analysis from Vietnam, Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. I hope you enjoy.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is John Gabriel, and I'm representing the Agora Institute from Alicante in Spain. But I am a professor at London Metropolitan University and a principal fellow of the Higher Education Academy in the United Kingdom. I also work for the Quality Assurance Agency, and I'm chair of the UK Oral History Society. I thought it would be useful to know a little bit about me, but the thing I missed off actually was what probably gives me the most kind of credential to talk about human resource management, as I was dean and head of a very large faculty in London for 15 years. And it was that practical experience, really, although there wasn't much in my job description about human resource management. Nevertheless, I spent a good deal of my time as dean and head of faculty grappling with issues of HRM. So I feel, in a sense, well positioned to talk about it today. As I said, I am representing the Agora Institute, who I work for on a part-time basis, and I would like to thank Nizar Ayadi and Rosa Lilo, who put together the presentation and administered and conducted the survey that I'm going to summarise. So not only is it my first, in my first 24 hours in Thailand, but it's also my first meeting of this project. And although I have worked in a number of similar projects in the past with Professor Vo Hung and others, this is the first time that I've been involved in this project. So I was not involved in the survey that I'm about to summarise, but I think it resonates with a number of points that Paolo made and also our distinguished keynote speaker made earlier. That's very small. So what I'm going to do is to summarise and speak to some of the main points. I wanted to say to you that the slides that have been produced are really more for your consumption and digestion at a later point. There's a lot of detail in them because they're summarising some of the main findings of the survey that the Agora Institute conducted. I won't be able to pick up the important differences that were highlighted in the survey's findings, but I will try and summarise them as briefly as possible. And I think what I'd like to do is to encourage you to think about the ways in which, within the partner organisations and your developments in your HR strategies, how some of these findings may highlight examples of best practice elsewhere or challenges for your own institutions. So bear that in mind as you look through some of the findings. I think it was very important what was said earlier in terms of strategic planning, this idea that universities exist as a series of silos. And I certainly experienced that as head of faculty over the period of time that I held that office, that HR was a department somewhere else in the university. And what I was dealing with was the kind of, if you like, the nuts and bolts of HR on a day-to-day basis. As a member of the executive group at the institution, though, we did talk to HR. What was missing, though, I felt, was a kind of an overarching strategy for HR, which wasn't just about technicalities and processes and functions, but was actually more about thinking about what the university was, what its mission was, what its wider objectives were, and an understanding not only of the institution but the wider world in which the university operated. I found what I thought was a very interesting example of an HR strategy which addressed exactly that. So I thought I would include it in the slides. It's from the University of Edinburgh, and you can see there that the strategy is only about 10 pages, and a lot of that is pictorial. Very few words. Most of the emphasis is on principles and key themes, key areas of action, not in terms of detailed processes, not in terms of functions. And I think it gives you an indication as to how important it is that human resource development thinks about and addresses what the university is as a whole before it starts devising its processes and functions. There needs to be a relationship between those activities, but it's important to start with the mission and the vision and the principles, and then you work through the processes and the operational aspects of HR as a result of those wider strategic discussions. So the strategy, you'll see if you look at the web link, is short on detail but long on principles and long on broad areas of activity. So the survey that you very kindly participated in, partner institutions in both Europe and in Southeast Asia, covered 42 qualitative and quantitative questions, which is why I won't be able to summarise them in any detail now. But they were nested under 6 areas, and you can see those listed if you can't read them: HRM policies, HRM general practice, recruitment, motivation and promotion, benefits, and labour unions, many of which Paolo has just, in a sense, underlined through his reflections on the workshops that were held. 22 universities responded to the survey, but bear in mind that 22 universities is not a large number, so when we look at percentages, we're talking about percentages of quite small numbers of universities, so be wary of those. And also, when I'm likely to gloss over a number of differences, particularly amongst partner universities, so the responses are quite varied and important to note them because they do indicate just how much variation there is between institutions and between countries. So if we start with HR policies, almost the entirety of the respondents, the 22 respondents, acknowledged that HRM was a strategic priority, but what was interesting was many universities hadn't actually instigated many reforms in HR, so that whilst there was a commitment to HR strategy, the practicalities of developing reforms, only 3/4, so there were a quarter of the institutions admitted that there were no reforms over the last few years. In terms of general practice in HR, a number had written policies, 95%, and you certainly won't be able to read this, but the policies included recruitment, attendance, scheduling, leave entitlement, performance evaluation, health and safety, and others. And the authors of the survey noted that one of the things that was low down on the list of priorities was health and safety. You might want to think about why that's a low priority. I would say it's critical, if you think about it in its broadest sense, to what was being discussed earlier in terms of the well-being of the staff, the happiness of the staff, the mental well-being of the staff. So the fact that it's a low priority maybe is something that you want to think about in terms of definitions of health and safety and its implications for training. In terms of IT systems, we've heard already how important the digital revolution's been in universities as it has been elsewhere in other sectors of society. And you can see that it's being implemented in a rather fragmented way for different features of HR policy, recruitment, attendance, scheduling, performance evaluation. They're used for a wide range of purposes, but still the conclusion was that IT systems are not a well-established practice. It's a challenge for universities to develop the systems that would meet the needs of the universities, and bear in mind that those needs need to relate back to the wider mission and objectives of the university. I do find it's a complaint of mine as an academic that so often IT systems are developed in isolation from the main body of university activity, the academic activity of the university in terms of teaching and research. There needs to be a lot more communication, in my view, between teachers and researchers and those developing those systems that we use as the tools of our trade. So here we're, in terms of HR practice, back to health and safety. So whilst health and safety protocols exist in a number of universities, as I said, what is less prevalent is health and safety training for employers. And even where it is provided, it's only provided for certain sectors of the workforce. So we really need to think about the different aspects of health and safety as they relate to different categories, different families of the workforce in the universities. When you were asked what were your priorities in terms of human resource management, a number mentioned that student satisfaction and the evaluation of employees' performance were the most important in terms of your institutions. What was less important was gender balance and occupational safety. I did wonder what was meant by gender balance. It's a term that needs unpacking a little bit, but I do think it has to do with diversity, which I'll come back to shortly, but I also think it has implications for health and safety, which I'll also come back to in a minute. Recruitment was the third topic, which was highlighted in the survey. Recruitment mechanisms included primarily online advertisements, but there was still variation between the universities and an unevenness in terms of how jobs were advertised, and a number of variations in terms of how they were conceived and described to would-be applicants. I think the key thing really for me is when you're thinking about recruitment, it's a fairly common sense position to adopt, but you need to think about going back to the mission, what you're trying to achieve in terms of your human capital. What are your goals as an institution? And it should follow really then how you advertise, how you represent the job. But again, sometimes jobs are described and advertised in a way that's separate from those wider strategic discussions. So, for example, a quarter of your respondents in the survey said that they did not specify characteristics and abilities in their job description. So that's fairly crucial, isn't it, really, when you think about it? You must know what you're looking for. Going back to a number of points that have been made this morning, we need high-quality teachers and researchers. We need to ensure that the job description appeals to those high-quality teachers and researchers and emphasises the ways in which we want to capitalise on their expertise and promote their expertise in the university. Most, 2/3 of the respondents said that they were committed to behavioural-based interviews, which means that when you interview, you talk about people's past experience and test that experience via a series of question and answers. There may be other ways, more creative ways of selecting applicants. One of the ways that I think has worked fairly effectively in universities in the UK is to put would-be teachers into a group of students and get them to discuss and talk with students as they would in a seminar. Similarly, if you're looking for researchers, to ask the candidates to produce and present a research paper to an audience is another way of ensuring that you're getting those skills. So you're seeing, if you like, those skills and requirements in action rather than asking people to reflect on them in a behavioural-based interview. What I thought, heartened by in terms of the response to the survey was that 84% of respondents said that they were aware of and committed to ensuring that applicants into jobs had a sense of the values of the university. And I think that's enormously important. It's something that often gets unstated. What kind of university are you? What kind of people do you want to attract? And I think having a sort of synergy between the values of the institution and the values of your staff is enormously important. So conveying those in different ways and testing those values. It's often tacit knowledge rather than explicit knowledge, not technical knowledge. It's the kind of emotional knowledge that was being talked about earlier. Exploring that with applicants is a very important part of the selection process, in my view. Similarly, we often write job descriptions in universities. I've done it myself on the basis of, well, somebody taught this job before, we need somebody to replace them, without thinking about what kind of jobs do we need. Have things changed? Have things moved on as they inevitably have? Do we need to sit down and just think about the jobs, evaluate the job that we're actually looking for? Maybe it's a different kind of job, in which case we don't simply rewrite or pull out the old job description and put it up there on the website or wherever we're advertising it. But we really do subject it to a more formal job analysis and think about it in relationship to other clusters of jobs within the subject area or within the administrative area. When the respondents were asked what were some of the main reasons why we weren't recruiting the most able, the most effective staff to posts, lack of incentives and low standards of recruitment were highlighted. And similarly for administrative staff, the lack of incentives and the lack of training were also held responsible for the reasons why administrative staff lacked sufficient skills. In the case of management, lack of training was highlighted as one of the challenges, and the lack of incentives. I think it's very interesting. I don't know how it is in universities in Southeast Asia or in other parts of Europe, but it's certainly true to say, and I speak as someone who was appointed to teach on the basis of my research, and I was appointed as a manager on the basis of my ability to teach. So there was no connect between the skills that were required of me and what I was being asked for in terms of my expertise and experience. So I'm not at all surprised that the lack of training in terms of management was highlighted in the survey. The lack of incentives too were highlighted as something that was responsible for managers not having sufficient skills. In terms of motivation and promotion, it was thought that whether staff were sufficiently motivated, only 37% considered that it wasn't applicable, and some of the reasons for the low motivation, if you have a look, low salaries, 86% lack of reward mechanisms, not so much lack of career perspectives, but 57% too many hours of work, so long hours, low salaries, and lack of reward mechanisms. I do think one of the changes and challenges in higher education over the period that I've worked in it is that the purpose of being an academic has changed. So I think that when I started, all that I wanted to do was to be a university lecturer. I was committed to my area of research. I was committed to my students. I didn't need, actually, reward mechanisms. The reward was being in a university and actually the job security and the benefits that went with it. I don't think that's the employment experience of younger, newer generation of lecturers coming into university now. I think there's a tendency to encourage people to think more instrumentally about work, and I think the values and the vocational side of being an academic is less important than it used to be. Sadly, I think, and regrettably, it is something that I think we should be reinvigorating in higher education. When it comes to job performance evaluations, and I know we're going to have some papers on that this afternoon, 84% said that there were some kind of appraisals or job evaluations. But what was interesting was that a third of respondents said that the universities gave no feedback on those evaluations. And I think that is a terrible wasted opportunity. And job evaluations must be a kind of two-way. At the very least, they're a two-way communication. You have to engage staff. It's part of motivating staff to hear what they've got to say about you, as well as what you've got to say about them. But if you're not even telling them what you think of them, then I really don't see the basis for development and enhancement and improvement in the quality of performance. So I do think if you're one of the third of institutions that said that they offered no feedback, then I do think that's something that you might want to think about and reflect on in terms of developing your strategic approach. Again, employers' satisfaction. Half of the respondents agreed this factor is assessed. Only half. I mean, I think it should be 100%. I think employees absolutely should be asked what they think of the university they're working in. I think there should be a 360-degree appraisal of managers as well as of staff. And I think that's the only way that actually you'll create the kind of collegiality, the well-being of the institution as a whole, the development of a community of practice within the universities, if you engage in genuine dialogue. So here are some ideas for training. So what you said you trained mostly your staff in were foreign languages and IT. Pedagogy and institutional management also featured. But much less transferable skills, project management, and institutional management was way down. Going back to what I was saying earlier, I had to develop my finance skills, for example, on the job. So I had a budget of £30 million, and I had to learn how to manage that budget as I went along. I was not trained in it. So I think there are real gaps in terms of institutional management. You need people like deans and heads of faculty to have an understanding of those principles of management and not keep them over in the finance department. Those things need to be joined up in the way that we've heard they should be this morning by our keynote speaker. Opportunities for promotion. There was a sense that there was a career structure in your universities. It's very important. I have to say it's been a challenge at my university. Funding has made it very difficult to create more senior posts, with the result that there's a kind of block in middle kind of tier lecturing to go to the more senior posts of reader and professor. And likewise in administrative posts, there tends to be a very few at the apex and most at the bottom or the middle ranks. Again, you seem to think that you're doing a fairly okay job in terms of retaining essential employees. You do think that public universities have got more to offer currently than private universities, so you're not experiencing much competition in terms of private universities. But that a number of you did mention that the competition was more from private companies. And I go back to my point. I think universities have something very distinct and unique to offer. And whilst I think many of the practices of the private sector are to be welcomed at university, I also think we ought to treat them guardedly and to ensure that universities maintain what they've always been very distinctive at, which is something for the public good, doing a service for the public good, rather than simply thinking about a kind of private sector priorities of bottom lines and finance management and so on. So I think if we re-establish what we're good at and best at universities, we certainly won't face as much competition from the private sector as we may be at the moment. Benefits. I don't want to dwell too much on this because I think you have got some very interesting examples of benefits. Tuition assistance, life insurance, childcare assistance, subsidised meals, subsidised housing. Some very interesting ones from different partner universities, very varied. and ones that I hadn't come across before. And finally, labour unions. I was interested in this, a lot of experience of working with labour unions in the UK, and a member of one myself, that there was a very mixed response to the presence of labour unions and the value of labour unions in universities. And I thought overall a sense that actually there was a lot more scope for labour unions to be involved in developing best practice in universities than a number of respondents felt there was. And a number of areas of discussion and dialogue that unions could be involved in that they're currently not. So I just suggested there, the labour unions play quite an active role in individual casework, of harassment, etc., of discrimination, unfair dismissal, health and safety, and diversity. So finally, or almost finally, there were a few points that a number of the partners made. Cambodia felt that there was a need to integrate some of the HRM practices, improve incentives for teaching and research. Again, improving incentives for teaching and research, that's the bread and butter of universities, isn't it? If we're not doing that well, then what are we doing? And sometimes it's a result of that silo, those kind of fragmentations in universities, that HR have one set of policies, but they don't take account of actually what universities are about. So we need to join up those dots in the university and ensure that they're integrated effectively. Thailand felt that there was a need to manage relationships between various types of employees, and Vietnam again talking about the link between teaching and scientific research. So it just occurred to me as I was looking through it, and I was a kind of newcomer to the survey and to the project, just to pass some overall reflections on what I'd been reading. And I've made this point, and you've made it, how important it is to integrate HR into institution-wide strategic planning. How important it is for HR in embodying itself in the university to be flexible. And management of change was mentioned this morning. I didn't see much reference to it in the responses to the survey, and maybe that's a reflection of the questions in the survey, but it's certainly something that, having spent a number of years in universities over a number of decades, it's certainly my experience that we need to be flexible, we need to adapt, we need to innovate. And I think there are ways of encouraging and galvanizing that spirit of innovation, whilst at the same time being true to the academic ideals of our academic staff, of our research staff and our teaching staff. Although, as Paolo was saying, there is a tendency, an intrinsic tendency to resist those kinds of changes. I think if they're approached carefully and they're done in a way which is paying respect to faculty members, to their knowledge and expertise, I think there are ways of negotiating those developments in a more effective way. Diversity, I just would like to say how important it is. I don't think diversity is just about complying with the law. I don't think it's just about the bottom line either. But I do think that it's got to do with health and safety. If I think about the training that we have to do at the university for people in wheelchairs, how do we ensure that they're evacuated from the building? How do we ensure that they have access to the buildings? All of these things come through discussion and then through training. Curriculum development has a diversity element as well as an internationalization element. So if you have that as a principle, you need to be thinking about how you build a curriculum that's responsive to the needs of demographic changes, locally and nationally and internationally. And the student experience. The student body is often very different to the staff body. So we have to acknowledge that diversity in our student body and how we respond to it as an institution. Staff engagement and motivation. I've talked a bit about that, how important it is to go back to the values of the university, to communicate with staff but listen to staff, to have a process of dialogue where you share and own the developments, co-own the developments rather than having them come down from the top. And the importance of non-financial benefits, and I do want to emphasise what was emphasised in the keynote speech earlier, of well-being, of things that are not that tangible. So we have, it's maybe of interest in this part of the world, we have yoga classes in our university. And I have to say they've been, as far as I'm concerned, they've been extremely valuable in terms of managing stress as well as my physical well-being. So mental and physical well-being are important features, and the university can show a lot of goodwill to staff by thinking about the kinds of activities and initiatives that it takes in order to show that they care for the staff that they're employing. And to see HR, as has been said this morning, but again I didn't see too much of it in the survey questions and responses, but to see HR management as a tool for transforming the work environment, to make the work environment more effective and, as described this morning, happier and a more ethical place to work. So we're thinking about the ways in which we can do the right thing as practitioners in higher education, and we need to ensure that that moral framework is part of our HR strategy. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that moving presentation. For our last presentation, we have Jang Hien Jong Takon from Thammasat University and College of Social Sciences, Far East University, talking on the topic of a time layoff. Thai University on fire. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Professor Dr. Chila, organizing committee, participants, guests, thank you very much for giving a chance to join this very important conference. You probably have heard all the speakers talking about the macro level of human resource management, and also going into the strategic human resource. And thank you for paving the way, paving the ground for me, so I don't have to touch many of the items that I plan to do. So I will do the shortcut of my presentation. I will use only a few slides instead of using all of them. I'm a Thai, but working in Korea and also working in Thailand. My background, as you can see, I'm a lawyer, but transferred to human resource management and business management later on. So from my point of view, you probably thinking that I'm a pessimist because I'm talking about lay off people in the university. But in fact, I'm quite positive thinking. I just want to raise a yellow flag, maybe a red flag for the university in Thailand. Not only in Thailand, I think we are facing the same situation all over the world. The demographic change of the world, and also, especially in Thailand, emerging into the aging society. So we have to change, we have to adjust ourselves. And for me, my topic is a time to lay off. Thai University on fire. Okay, I will go to the show you the okay, I will shortcut to show you the change and the expansion, the situation, the current situation of Thai University. I went back to a decade, 10 years. Back in 2007, we have 145 universities, and it's expanded up until last year. We have 228 universities, both public and private universities. In terms of students, in the past, it's very strong competitive to be in university because people want to have a degree. It's a value in Thailand. If you don't have a degree, it's looked as if you are going to die. You have no place in the society. So everyone wants to have a degree. But now, the value is changing because of we produce a lot of graduates, and then they can't find a job. They have to be underemployed, and they have to do the work that require less skill than what they actually learn or what they actually get. So the people now changing, the value changing gradually. They said that, so what? Why spend 6 years in school and come out with no job? So the number of students, even though it went up to the peak in 2015 from about 1,400,000 to almost in 2015, I'm sorry, this is a wrong slide, okay, sorry. 2007, the number of students is about 1 million. And then it went up to 2013 to more than 2 million. And it started to decline, coming down. The number last year is only 1.8 million. And there's a plus seat in the university, about 40,000 seats available, but nobody want to go. So the number of students is less. At the same time, the number of employees is corresponding to the expansion of the university. From 2007, about 1,400,000, and it went up to 200,000 last year. Probably less now because some of them are merging and some of them are facing with the layoff. Okay. So this is the contrast situation while we are expanding the university and the number of employees in the university, 3 types, the administrator, the academic, the professor, and also the supporting staff. So it's contrasting situation. The expansion of the number of universities, strong competition both in Thailand and also from abroad, and the number of employees went up, but the number of students come down. So what is going to happen? We are facing with a lot of challenge. Can be both internal challenge and also external challenge. The first challenge, I think, we are changing the university, like Professor Dr. Jilat mentioned this morning. Most of the public university went out to be autonomous university. When you become an autonomous university, you have a full power in managing your university. And there are lots of change in managing, especially in the human resource. And the first thing they did, most universities, what they did is increase the salary of the president, and also the dean, and also the professor. Some of the universities, the budget for the people is 80% of the total budget. Oh my God, what are they going to do? How are they going to do when the crisis is coming in? So this is what happened. And decreasing number of the students, expansion of the university, autonomous university, and politics. Politics in university is very strong, and the court case, a lot of court case in the court, either the civil case or the criminal case or the administrative case. So there are lots of fighting. Whenever a recruitment in the president come, the politics come in, because one of the criteria for selection, even though it's not the final, is the popularity vote. Once you gain the popularity and you get to be appointed, the fighting come in. Some universities take 3 to 5 years before they can resolve that. Many universities have the acting of president because they cannot be appointed because the case is in court. So it's create a lot of conflict in the university instead of using our brain. We are the center of the highest educated people. We are the center of elite, but we are abusing it. We are not using it for the productive or for the progressive of the university. Many of them, fighting for themselves. Okay, that is one of the main problems now we are facing it. And many people have said that, especially John mentioned about the training of the management staff. When you are autonomous university, you're supposed to run your business, run the university as a business. But what we recruit from, like you mentioned, someone was appointed as a manager based on the excellence of teaching. This is the same thing. Most of the university president or the dean are elected from internal, and most of the university council are senior people, and they have the experience. But most of them, there's some business, but I think it's very few of them. 90% are from retired government, and we need to look at the new vacancy. But what we brought in, we want to be out of the government or bureaucratic. But what happened? We build more rules and regulations for protect ourselves. We build more bureaucracy. We build more silo. This is what happened. So it's breaking down the university, the politics, and competency of the management, and the increasing case court sued by university staff at all levels, including the president and the dean, not the lower level, not the administrative level. So this is what is a situation that harms the progressing of the university. For the external challenge, decreasing number of the students, expansion, like I showed you in the graph, and the rules supervision from the government. When they are under the government, they are very strict control. But once you are free, you use the power and cause some problem. And the need of the skill in science and technologies are more than social science. In Thailand, the ratio is reversed. We are supposed to produce 60 to 70% of science and technology graduates, but it's in the reverse. We produce about 60 to 70% of the social science graduates. So it's a mismatch in the market. This is one reason why people do not want to go to the university and changing the need of the skill level at vocational level and changing the demographic I mentioned already, and the openness of the foreign university to recruit Thai students to study abroad. Many countries set up permanent office agencies, student recruiting in Thailand. In Simon, there are quite a few of the office, and they provide very good service. Yeah. They provide very good service from preparation, English, testing, and also visa and everything. So it's very convenient. So that creates another alternative for Thai students. And the promotion of the foreign university, Article 44 was issued recently, and given a very high privilege to foreign university over Thai university. They are exempted from taxation. They are exempted from the Thai law, and more privilege, and they can demand more. There are provision in that announcement that foreign university will be given, on demand. So Thai university are competing with not only among the public university themselves and the private university themselves, they also compete with the foreign university. The National Strategic Plan is a 20-year plan. So let's talk about reforming education, and I think university will face with some changing, and it's a big change, and some of them may not be affordable for the huge investment that they have invested before in terms of infrastructure and also in terms of the human resource, especially those professors or people who are teaching social science will find difficulty in converting into teaching or redeploying into the other field. The 12th National Development Plan, like Dr. Chilak said this morning, we want to become the full developed country at the end of this plan, and we want to be a high income nation in the next few years. So in order to do that, education is one of the most serious, and the Thailand 4.0 policy. Okay, these are the challenge. These are the cause for creating the crisis in Thai university. Let's take a look. What would happen from this challenge? I can see 7 things would be happening. Dr. Anon Atnida suggested, he admitted in his article that it's happened faster than he forecast, because he continued and he's monitoring the situation of Thai university, and he said that the layoff is come so fast and very soon. So what would happen? Of course, downsizing. Many programs were closed down. A lot of programs were closed down and scaled down the university downsizing. When you face with downsizing, of course, it impacts human resource management. And the second is that merger and acquisition. It's happened now. Recently, it was announced that investors from China bought one university. In fact, more, but it's openly announced that only one recently. So, it's, for private university, it might be happening very soon that it might be taken over by a stronger Thai university, or by a stronger, or by a foreign investor, or by a foreign university. So merger and acquisition is foreseeable. It is happening now. It's happening now. The third is, in public sector, you cannot sell the university, the public university. But what might happen is that stronger university, either Thai or foreigner, may, using the management outsourcing strategy, bring in the team and manage the university. So the next is, if you cannot survive, you probably have to scale down, changing to the lower level, like vocational school and training institute, like Ratchamongkol. They used to be, they came, you know, they were upgraded from vocational level up to the university level. So they have potential that they may go back, you know, to provide those graduates at those levels. And training or changing to other business, depending on their expertise. In some university where they're strong in research, they may become research institute. In some university, they may diversify into the industrial consulting or management consulting or whatever to survive. At the end, if they cannot survive, they have to close down. They have to close down. Okay. What happened? These 7 activities going on, and of course, we will face with the restructuring of the requirement or the needs of the human resource in university. So, layoff is coming sooner or later. So I'd like to suggest that we prepare for that. First of all, we have to look at our human resource planning, or manpower planning. In the past, we looked only one side, add more people, more and more and more. But we didn't look at the other side. When the business go down, how are we going to do with those people that already own more? Like I said, 80% are spent in human resource out of the total. So we have to to create efficiency, productivity, to be more productive. And if it's necessary, we probably have to use the attrition. Where the people go, we don't refill, or we probably put on a hiring freeze. You have to reallocation of the people within the organization, within the university. The most important thing you have to do is the communication and also the legal compliance, because in education, it's not under the labor law, but they have the special law. But probably don't have a clear-cut position on this yet. So we probably have to prepare for that. The second phase is the layoff phase. If you cannot survive, you have to either downsize or whatever. It impacts the people in the university. First thing, you probably use the outplacement, help them to get a job and using the buyout, voluntary resignation, using the forced layoff would be the last resort. And not only that, after layoff, you have to look after them. Employee assistance program, you have to provide the access clearance, and the important thing for those universities that are not closing, the people who stay, the motivation, the morale, the management system, you have to change. You have to change. Okay, I was warning, so I'm going to. What my suggestion is that we have to go back and look at our human resource planning. Not only one side, look both sides, balance it, and create efficiency in our university, and try to avoid layoff. Layoff should be the last resort to use, unless you have to close down. And in that case, you have to comply with all the requirements. And also, you have to do very good communication, not only in university, but also with all the group of stakeholders. Okay, thank you very much.